You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably, with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Hello, once again, to another journey into the unexplored, the unexplained Ecto Portal. I'm Anthony Anderson, your host, and I'm here with my co-host,
Verna Wilson.
And we do a lot of different topics on this show that cover a lot of ground of history, past, current, present, and possibly even future. But sometimes we actually encounter stories that may be interesting, but maybe not enough to sustain a whole, complete show just for that particular story. So we have actually put together for you we call True and Freaky Stories, and we might do a number of these shows that are just collections of different types of stories together, because we think they're interesting stories, but they may not be sustainable enough for an entire episode. So that's kind of what our goal is today in this particular episode. We think you'll find these stories interesting, shocking. Some of them are paranormal, some of them are just mysteries, but some of them are both. So we thought we'd just present these to see, to give them some kind of a voice, I think. And
Ecto Portal is known for their true and freaky stories.
Yep.
That's what we do, but these are shorter and they're shorter and they're enough for us to talk about and then do a number of them on an episode. Yeah,
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off here. Now, this first story is about Operation Wandering Soul. Now, in the Vietnamese culture, it's essential to properly bury a loved one in their birthplace so as to ensure their contentment in the afterlife. If not, then the deceased soul will wander aimlessly as it tries to find its way back home. Now, the U.S. forces in the Vietnam War were aware of this particular superstition and took advantage of it, knowing that the Viet Cong were worried that many of the soldiers would die far from home and unable to be properly buried. U.S. forces employed a freaky psychological scare tactic known as Operation Wandering Soul. Now, the 6th Psychological Operations Battalion, 6th PSYOP, say that 10 times fast, of the U.S. Army broadcast disturbing moans and groans of disembodied voices throughout the jungle on a series of loudspeakers or from planes flying overhead, and for many of the Viet Cong, the tactic was nothing short of terrifying. Now, a copy of the Wandering Soul tape used to petrify the Viet Cong. One of the audio tapes was called Ghost Tape Number 10 and included the tormented voices of children. Now, the scare tactic was inspired by a ghost army of inflatable tanks and personal carriers used to fool German recon missions into thinking that the Allies had more troops and tanks than there actually was during World War II. That's an interesting tactic.
Yeah, that is.
The hair-raising messages sent through the jungle not only suggested to the nervous Viet Cong that their fallen comrades were skulking invisibly amongst them, but there were also messages that specifically pleaded with them to give up the fight. With the help of South Vietnamese participants, such freaky messages were created like, "My friends, I have come back to let you know that I am dead. I am dead." Or, "Don't end up like me. Go home, friends, before it's too late." And we actually did a show a while back called the Terrifying Sounds Ever Recorded, and we actually played some of this. I'm going to go ahead right now and play just an example of some of this, just to give people kind of an idea of what it sounded like. So let me go ahead and play that for you now. Now, when a South Vietnamese ally of the U.S. purposely spread a rumor among the Viet Cong that a tiger had been attacking Vietnamese troops, the 6th PSYOP began adding recordings of tiger growls into the mix. And it's estimated that around 150 men fled the mountain when this tape was played. Of course, some were onto the Americans and simply started shooting into the audio's direction, whether up at the helicopters and planes or at the speakers around them. So it's an interesting tactic. I didn't realize it was started in World War II as a tactic to make it seem like they had more troops and artillery than they really had.
There was a lot of tactics they did like that in World War II, especially announcing over radio, making like fake numbers or all kinds of broadcasts where they were trying to scare people.
Uh-huh.
So yeah,
I just never heard. I didn't realize it started in World War II. I thought it was only. I've heard of this because if you ever watch the movie Apocalypse Now, I'm pretty sure they have a piece where they're playing this kind of stuff in the jungle. Besides playing regular music, because that kind of scared them as well. But I think they were doing this in part of the movie, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's where I first learned about it.
Yeah. Some of the sounds of the children, I could imagine where did they get that sound, and I could imagine how horrifying that would be to think that some children are being hurt somewhere, or
yeah, I mean,
hearing that sound.
I can't imagine what that would induce in them. Like, is it their children? I mean, they're away from home anyway, fighting the U.S., so is it their children? Is it the ghost of their children? Have their children been killed? Have their fellow soldiers and the children been killed? I can imagine if they're that superstitious and they believe that stuff, that would have, that would have an impact on you. It takes away from your focus of obviously fighting the enemy, especially in the jungles at night. So I'm sure that was a useful tactic that the U.S. had used with the 6th PSYOP. I think it's interesting. I can imagine that playing over and over every night. So
I bet a lot of them weren't fooled.
I don't know how long that would have lasted, how effective that would have been continually played. Like, did the Viet Cong finally went, you know what? We realize this is a recording. You guys keep playing it. I don't know how long they could have used that. I'd be curious to find out how long that was effective. I'm
sure that a lot of them weren't fooled and they were on to it.
It's kind of eerie sounding, though.
It is, but I mean, after a while, I'm pretty sure they were on to it after a while.
Yeah, I could imagine. I mean, I would imagine if you start up and stop at the same time every night, you're going to start thinking, well, this is a little weird.
I mean, they would have to get variety in order for them to think it's real, but where are they going to get a bunch of scary noises? Where from?
Exactly. I don't know where they would do that.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting story. I mean, it's not really. Yeah. It is sort of paranormal in that it's inducing the fear of superstition of the paranormal.
Right.
So it is a paranormal slang to it.
Right, and it's a part of Vietnam history that you don't hear about very often.
No.
So
nope.
That's why it's on this show, of course.
Yeah. Again, preying on a culture whose belief in the superstition in their own communities, they still hold on to that. Even in the 60s, they held on to those superstitions and cultures. A lot of cultures still have some.
Yeah.
The Chinese have a lot of that. So it isn't that surprising that the U.S. would try and use that against them, which is, it's sad, but it's war too. So
It's war. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
yep. So what do you got?
Well, we have another story called the Tucker telephone torture device. Now everybody wonders, how could a telephone be a torture device? But we're going to go ahead and find out.
To some people, when they're on the telephone for hours, it is kind of torturous for other people.
Or if somebody makes a prank phone call and it's an unsavory character, that would be a torturous advice because that's meant to scare the hell out of you.
Yep. There you go.
So let's go ahead and figure out how the Tucker telephone became a torture device. So if you were unfortunate enough to be imprisoned at the Tucker State Prison, at the Tucker State Prison farm in the early 1960s in Arkansas, you might have experienced one of the most hellacious torture devices ever invented. It was called the Tucker telephone. The Tucker telephone was used on prisoners until the 1970s at what is now the Tucker Unit of the Arkansas Department of Correction. Prison physician Dr. A.E. Rollins and prison superintendent Jim Bruton devised the machine to punish unruly inmates using an old crank telephone, an electric generator, and 2 dry batteries. This was no ordinary phone, but rather an electric shock device employed on the most private of parts. These horrific sessions were exclusively held in the prison hospital. The encyclopedia in the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, the scary story of the Tucker phone became so controversial that it was depicted in numerous films, including Brubaker, starring Robert Redford. Inmates sent to the hospital room were strapped down to a table with 2 wires applied to their skin. Unfortunately, while the ground wire would be wrapped around their big toe, the hot wire through which the electricity ran was strapped to their genitals.
Ouch.
Ooh, oh my God, that sounds awful. Once the doctors turned the crank, their subject... Yeah, exactly. So once the doctors turned the crank, their subjects were viciously shocked by torrents of electrical current. The sheer lack of humanity was further displayed by particularly long sessions of torture, which were referred to as long-distance calls. In long-distance calls, several charges were inflicted of a duration designed to stop just short of the inmates fainting. Sometimes the telephone operator's skill was so defective and sustained current not only caused the inmate to lose consciousness, but resulted in damage to his testicles.
Ooh.
Ugh, that sounds horrible. The Tucker prison farm also whipped inmates, beat them with 5-foot paddles, put needles under their fingernails, and of course, executed them using Old Sparky, an electric chair that was used 104 times. Tragically, many of the prisoners not only ended up with permanent organ damage, but also became mentally insane. And the Tucker telephone wasn't the only creepy true story to come out of the Tucker prison farm. Guards also employed the strap, which was a wooden handle used to beat prisoners. A Newsweek report from February 20th, 1967 claimed that prisoners even had needles put under their fingernails and were often tortured with pliers. The freaky stories of torture that came out of Tucker prison were so common that the Tucker telephone eventually found its way depicted in, as we said before, the 1980 film Brubaker. Tragically, its use never ceased. The Chicago Violent Crime Unit, managed by Lieutenant John Burge, he used the device to torture suspects in the 1980s and American GIs in Vietnam and American interrogators at Abu Ghraib prison. They also used the Tucker telephone. Oh, it sounds horrible.
Yikes.
You have to do something pretty awful in order for them to resort to that device. But I don't even think I think it's inhumane.
But I understand why you would use it overseas as a torture device for prisoners of war, maybe. I mean,
to get them to talk.
Yeah, but what I don't understand is why on earth would you use it in an American prison? What are you torturing the prisoners for?
Yeah, well, they said it was for unruly inmates, like for inmates who weren't behaving. But how unruly did you have to be to do that?
That's awfully sadistic for an unruly inmate.
And in the hospital, it was taking place in the hospital, a place where you're supposed to be getting well.
Yeah, it's the exact opposite. We're
That's
inflicting
horrible.
permanent damage. It's amazing how the prison system has changed. And I know Eastern State Penitentiary, where you're in a small cell doing penance, and that was your punishment, is you were being faced with yourself and what you've done and what you had to achieve to get out, versus, oh, you're bad, you keep being bad, we're going to keep torturing you, you're going to get badder. You're not going to get better if someone tortures you. You're going to get more pissed
No.
and more evil and want to lash out and kill someone. So it's interesting how the prison system changed over the years to realize
Yeah.
you have to rehabilitate a prisoner and not keep punishing them for being the way they were. That's the whole point, is you're rehabilitating, not
Right. And
not abusing someone for being bad in the first place and keep abusing them, because you're just perpetuating the same activity and behavior.
well, what's interesting about this prison was known to torture their prisoners in various ways. So they had a reputation, and it made me wonder why nobody. Well, I guess they did have a report. It was a Newsweek report, so somebody was onto it, and hopefully that stopped it after a while. But they said it went on till the 1970s.
In the 80s, they said.
And
Remember
in the
Chicago
80s,
Police
yeah,
Department?
further than that. So that's horrible. I mean,
mean,
I
the
don't
fact
know.
that I can imagine a police department in the 1980s, even in Chicago, would strap someone on a table to this device in their genitals and just electrocute them.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
it's amazing that it was used that late.
because if it resulted in somebody's death and they weren't supposed to kill that prisoner, that could get somebody in deep water, really.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of sadistic people who are at the control of the phone, who probably love
Yeah.
to use the phone too. So, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of.
I mean, who came up with that?
Well, I'm sure back in the day they thought, oh, the worst prisoner. Maybe a prisoner cut someone, tried to kill someone, and they thought, oh, we need to punish them, and that was their way of punishing back then. Was let's. I still don't understand how, other than just being torturous, I don't understand the purpose of it.
No, I mean, who invented that Tucker telephone? Who invented it? Who thinks of things like that? Oh, let's kill them this way. I mean, not kill them. Let's torture them this way. How horrible!
Yeah,
What kind of mind would invent something like that? Is what I wonder.
Yeah, I think that's crazy too. I don't know. It's just, ugh. I think it was in Arkansas that many years.
Yeah. It's awful, and it's awful to think somebody was there. I mean, I don't think it really made anybody behave any better. I mean,
No.
I don't know. I wasn't there, but
No.
people are gonna do what they're gonna do, and I don't know. I don't think they use. Oh, if you don't behave, we're gonna use a Tucker telephone on you.
Exactly.
Ew.
I have another story it's also to do with a phone in a way.
Yeah.
The number that dialed death. So this one, it's an interesting story. Coincidence or not, a mobile phone company was so unnerved by a cursed phone number that it decided to discontinue its service. Now, the cell phone number in question was 0888-888-888, and it was issued to 3 people in 1 decade, all who unexpectedly died while having the phone number.
Ouch.
The first victim was Vladimir Grashnov, the former CEO of Bulgarian mobile phone company Mobitel, and he died of cancer in 2001 shortly after receiving the number from Mobitel. He was barely 48 years of age, and it was rumored that he'd slowly been radioactively poisoned to death by the competitor. Now, the second owner of the phone number was just as unfortunate as Grashnov, but he was also a Bulgarian mafia boss. At just 31 with the phone on his person, Konstantin Dimitrov was gunned down during dinner with a model at his side. Mobitel's CEO died of cancer in 2001, and they obviously thought the phone was to blame. And obviously Dimitrov was on a 2003 trip to the Netherlands to check on his $617 million drug smuggling empire when a lone gunman shot him. The general consensus was that the Russian mafia bosses, envious of Dimitriev's businesses, had ordered the hit.
Yikes.
Now, The number was then given to another person, the third and final victim. To hold the cursed number was another man operating on the wrong side of the law. His name was Konstantin Dijliev, and he was a crooked businessman and real estate agent who was similarly shot to death while sitting down in an Indian restaurant. The ambitious criminal secretly operated a massive cocaine trafficking operation before his luck ran out in 2005. And indeed, the scariest part of this true story was how all three men died shortly after acquiring the unlucky phone number. Now, all three deaths were properly investigated. The number was nonetheless periodically kept dormant by law enforcement after each owner died. Whenever it was brought out of retirement and reassigned, however, a death soon followed. After the third death in 10 years, the cell phone company suspended the number for good. It provided no comment on the matter, whether those in charge believed in the superstition or not, and have yet to reassign the number to a new customer.
What do you think?
I don't know if I totally buy into the cursed number. I think, there's so many people out there and so many phone numbers. The fact that it was these three people over, what did they say, a decade? Mm-hmm. In 1 decade, and all three died. The two of them were thugs.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Cancer. So the fact that two criminals died because they were drug smugglers, they would have died anyway, maybe. And the guy who got cancer anyway.
It is weird, though, that they all had the same number.
It is weird, and the fact that there's so many 888. It reminds me of that. What did they say? I forget what it's called. Where it's in numbers. Mm-hmm. Numerology.
Numerology.
We should actually do a show about numerology.
We should.
But it kind of seems like that because there's all 1 0 and the rest are all 8s. So.
Tony, what I think would be a great idea. If we do a show on numerology, we should have a numerologist come on the show, and we should save this story and have the numerologist do some numerology on the numbers, the number sequence, and see what it comes out to and what the numerologist thinks about these numbers. I'd be
curious to see what kind of results they could derive from this based on what's obviously happened with that number. I would be curious. That would be an interesting test, I think.
Yeah.
Now you have another story dealing with telephone poles and numbers, correct?
I do. So before I read that story, I want to go ahead and direct direct the listeners to a classic episode of Ecto Portal called Phone Numbers from the Dead, where we actually talk about people receiving phone calls from somebody who's already died. It was a whole episode that we did. So
that's right. Phone Calls from the Dead. I forgot about that show. That was a good show.
Yeah, it was a good show. So we'll probably put the episode on for people to listen to at one point, but just a thought. Okay. So let's go ahead and go into this story. This story is called Mysterious Numbers Stations. So it's about a telephone pole with superimposed numbers. Good old-fashioned espionage made a rather ominous leap forward with the advent of shortwave radio-based communications. In the 1980s, researchers found a way to contain short bursts of audio in 10-minute messages when translated into Morse code from covert number stations over the radio. This was particularly useful during the Cold War when spies needed to pass along data without anyone noticing. But these mysterious number stations were soon noticed by casual radio listeners who were horrified by the thought that they could potentially endanger their lives by unintentionally dropping in on an exchange sent by the CIA, KGB, or Mossad. Some of these strange exchanges included the unsettling voices of women and children simply reading out a random string of letters and numbers over the radio. One of the countless ominous messages from an Australian number station called Cherry White. While technology and time have marched forward, these number stations are still used, and it's thought to be one of the most convenient and foolproof methods of communicating with field agents, precisely because the format seems so passé nowadays. While intelligent service-to-agent communication is the leading theory on the existence of number stations, there are still some historians and researchers who want to write number stations off as a creepy story and nothing more. They think it's all the result of an extremely well-executed and elaborate prank. Given the enormous number of radio stations in all the languages in which these messages are transmitted. However, it would be $1 billion, 50-some-odd-year prank, of which seems pretty far-fetched. Some of the more alluring number stations originated in Russia, where one broadcast from Moscow featured nothing but the number 5 for several hours during an attempted coup. Nobody knows exactly why or what it meant, and many of these spooky messages use women's and children's voices. One station, known merely as the Buzzer, has broadcast 2 buzzes at the top of every hour since the mid-1970s. These are followed by fuzzy tones between every 21st and 34th minute during Russian daylight hours, with the male voice reading a string of numbers or names like Anna, Nikolai, Ivan, Tatiana, Roman. This station has captured the imagination of so many that a global fan base dedicated to solving its purpose has emerged in recent years. One of the many theories is that this is a dead hand signal that would activate nuclear retaliation should Russia ever be decimated by foreign powers.
That's interesting. It's an interesting that obviously came out in the 80s during the Cold War, but it's almost like it's been around for so long and it's continually used. It reminds me of like how UFOs, like, oh, are UFOs real? Is the government hiding them? It's around so long that it's kind of passé that people don't even really care anymore.
Right.
Even though it's still being used. So it's interesting. Obviously, it's effective if it's still being used even now.
Well, it's true. But what's interesting is that ordinary people who are really into resolving these puzzles have taken the time to learn about it and learn the numbers, sequence, the minute sequences and everything. I mean, they're following it. You know, that's a lot to follow. That's a lot of detail for them to get into. So it's no wonder they have their own little community where they're trying to resolve it.
I don't know, but I'd be afraid too that if it was the KGB or the CIA or someone would stumble upon you listening in, trace it back to you, and like you're asking for trouble.
I wouldn't feel good about it either, but
no, that's interesting.
I don't. Yeah, it is interesting. So, but it doesn't surprise me because they used a lot of ways to work with each other during the Cold War. And not that I would know about that, but I would hear about it.
Well, even in World War II, they used to use all kind of coded messages and that kind of thing. So it's not something new. It's just obviously they tried it in a different way in the 80s during the Cold War. So it's in 10-minute sessions, interesting, in a Morse code. And I'm sure you have to be very patient to decipher all of these messages as well.
Oh, I'm sure you do. So, but I'm with you. I would stay out of it. It's like, okay, that's your call, not mine.
Yeah, no thanks.
Stay away. No, thank you.
Thanks. All right, well, that's cool. Well, that's some stories that you know, again, stories that may not be long enough for one episode, but we think are interesting enough to kind of bring forward. And we'll probably do another show like this, more true and freaky stories.
Yeah,
you know,
and if anybody knows a freaky story, let us know.
Yep, we'll add them to the pile and do some more.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So I guess until next week, folks, that's another episode of Ecto Portal, and we'll see you then. Bye.
Bye. See you next week. Bye.
Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Kevin MacLeod and Ross Bugden.